There is a theft occurring in broad daylight, and you are both the victim and the unwitting accomplice. Your memory, your very sense of self, is being systematically extracted from you through methods so subtle that you mistake the process for entertainment. Who looks outside dreams? Who looks inside awakens? But what happens when we lose the ability to look inside at all? Carl Jung. Onward thinkers, my name is Mister Halvig, and you're watching The Rational Wise. Carl Gustav Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who mapped the depths of the human psyche, issued warnings over a century ago that read like prophecies of our current digital predicament. He understood that when a civilization loses its capacity for introspection, when individuals become disconnected from their inner landscapes, the result is not merely personal confusion, it is collective manipulation on an unprecedented scale. What you're experiencing, this sense that everything feels off, that reality itself seems somehow manufactured, is not paranoia. It is the recognition of what Jung called mass amnesia, the systematic erosion of individual memory and identity that leaves entire populations vulnerable to external control. In the next 20 minutes, we will examine 7 warning signs that Jung identified, signs that are manifesting in our digital age with terrifying precision. By the end of this journey, you will understand not only how your mind is being colonized, but more importantly, how to reclaim the sovereignty of your own consciousness. Sign 1, the fog of perpetual distraction. Jung observed that when the mind is constantly pulled toward external stimuli, it loses its capacity for what he called active imagination, the ability to generate meaning from within. Today, this manifests as what we might call cognitive drift, the experience of moving through your day without forming coherent memories of your experiences. The philosophical foundation of this phenomenon lies in Jung's understanding of attention as the architect of identity. When attention is fragmented, scattered across countless digital touchpoints, the self becomes similarly fragmented. You are not simply distracted. You are being systematically prevented from consolidating experiences into lasting memories. Consider the ancient Greek concept of kairos, the right or opportune moment for something. The Greeks distinguished this from chronos, mere chronological time. Digital platforms have weaponized chronos against kairos, creating an endless stream of now moments that prevent you from recognizing the deeper patterns and meanings that emerge only through sustained attention. In our contemporary landscape, this manifests as the inability to read a book without checking your phone, to have a conversation without mental interruptions, to experience a sunset without immediately photographing it. The modern mind has become like a river that has been diverted into 1,000 tiny channels, powerful in aggregate, but lacking the force to carve any meaningful path. The arsenal for combating this: begin by noticing the fog without fighting it. When you reach for your phone, pause and observe the impulse. Do not judge it, simply witness it. This act of witnessing is the first step in reclaiming your attention from the algorithms that have learned to predict and manipulate your behavioral patterns. Sign 2, the erosion of authentic emotion. Jung warned that when individuals lose touch with their genuine emotional responses, they become susceptible to what he termed emotional contagion, the unconscious adoption of feelings that originate outside the self. Today's digital environment has created a sophisticated system for manufacturing and distributing artificial emotional states. The psychological mechanism at work here is what Jung called projection, the tendency to attribute one's own emotions to external sources. Social media platforms have inverted this process, causing users to internalize emotions that are actually generated by algorithmic systems designed to maximize engagement through emotional arousal. The myth of Narcissus serves as a perfect metaphor for this condition. Narcissus fell in love with his own reflection, but what killed him was not self-love. It was the inability to distinguish between his authentic self and the image reflected back to him. Today's digital narcissism operates similarly. You are not falling in love with yourself, but with a carefully curated reflection that bears little resemblance to your actual inner life. In practical terms, this manifests as the experience of feeling emotions that don't quite belong to you. Sudden anger at news events that have no direct impact on your life, artificial urgency about trends that will be forgotten within days, or the peculiar emptiness that follows prolonged social media use. The remedy lies in what Jung called shadow work, the practice of recognizing and integrating emotions that you would prefer to disown. Begin by asking yourself, is this emotion arising from my direct experience, or am I borrowing it from an external source? This simple question can serve as a firewall against emotional manipulation. Your emotions are being rented to you. Sign 3. The collapse of personal narrative. Jung understood that psychological health depends on the ability to construct a coherent narrative of one's life, to see oneself as the protagonist of a meaningful story rather than a passive recipient of random experiences. Mass amnesia destroys this narrative capacity by fragmenting memory into disconnected moments. The underlying principle is what Jung called individuation, the process by which a person integrates various aspects of their personality into a unified whole. This process requires the ability to reflect on past experiences, to identify patterns, and to make conscious choices about future directions. When memory is fragmented, individuation becomes impossible. The Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, wrote extensively about the importance of maintaining a coherent sense of self across time. He practiced what he called the view from above, regularly stepping back to see his life as a unified whole rather than a series of disconnected moments. This practice was essential to his ability to govern effectively because leadership requires the capacity to see long-term patterns and consequences. Today, this collapse manifests as the inability to remember what you did last week, the sense that your past feels like it happened to someone else, or the experience of making decisions that contradict your stated values without recognizing the contradiction. The restoration of personal narrative requires what Jung called active imagination, the deliberate practice of connecting past experiences to present circumstances and future possibilities. Begin by writing 3 sentences about your day before you sleep, focusing not on what happened, but on what it meant to you. Sign 4. The replacement of wisdom with information. Jung distinguished between knowledge and wisdom, understanding that wisdom emerges from the integration of knowledge with personal experience over time. Mass amnesia attacks this integration process by overwhelming the mind with information while preventing the reflective states necessary for wisdom to emerge. The philosophical foundation of this phenomenon lies in Jung's concept of the collective unconscious, the shared repository of human experience that provides the foundation for genuine insight. When individuals are cut off from their own unconscious processes, they lose access to this deeper wisdom and become dependent on external authorities for guidance. The ancient tradition of the oracle at Delphi offers a powerful example of how wisdom operates. The oracle did not provide information. She provided interpretations that require the seeker to engage in deep reflection about their own circumstances. The famous maxim, "Know thyself," was not an informational directive, but a wisdom practice. In our current environment, this manifests as the tendency to seek answers to complex personal questions through Google searches, to rely on influencers for life guidance, or to expect immediate solutions to problems that require extended contemplation. The path to wisdom requires what Jung called holding the tension of opposites, the ability to sit with uncertainty and contradiction until a deeper understanding emerges. This cannot be rushed or Googled. It requires the cultivation of what the Greeks called sophia, the patient development of understanding through direct experience. Information is not wisdom. We have examined 4 signs of the mass amnesia that Jung warned would characterize our age: the fog of perpetual distraction, the erosion of authentic emotion, the collapse of personal narrative, and the replacement of wisdom with information. These represent the foundational mechanisms through which individual consciousness is colonized by external forces. But Jung's most profound insights concern not merely the symptoms of this condition, but the deeper archetypal patterns that make such colonization possible. The 3 signs we will now explore reveal the sophisticated psychological mechanisms that turn human beings into what Jung called mass men, individuals who have lost the capacity for independent thought and authentic experience. If you're enjoying the content, don't forget to hit the like button. It helps more than you think. Now let's continue. Sign 5. The inversion of the hero's journey. Jung recognized that healthy psychological development follows what he called the hero's journey, a process of leaving the familiar, encountering challenges, and returning with new wisdom. Mass amnesia inverts this journey, creating what we might call the victim spiral, a process of perpetual complaint without growth, endless consumption without satisfaction. The archetypal foundation of this pattern lies in Jung's understanding of the poor eternus, the eternal child who refuses to engage with the challenges necessary for psychological maturation. Digital platforms have created an environment that enables perpetual adolescence by providing the illusion of agency without requiring actual responsibility. The myth of Sisyphus, who was condemned to push a boulder up a mountain for eternity, was understood by the ancient Greeks as a warning about the futility of avoiding one's true calling. Sisyphus's punishment was not the difficulty of the task, but the meaninglessness of endless repetition without growth. Today's digital culture has made Sisyphus's punishment voluntary. We choose to scroll endlessly, to consume content without creating meaning. In contemporary terms, this manifests as the addiction to outrage, the preference for entertainment over engagement, the tendency to seek validation rather than truth, and the substitution of virtual achievements for real accomplishments. The restoration of the hero's journey requires what Jung called voluntary suffering, the willing acceptance of difficulty in service of growth. Begin by identifying one area of your life where you have been avoiding necessary challenge, and take one small step toward engaging with that challenge. Sign 6. The dissolution of sacred boundaries. Jung understood that psychological health depends on the maintenance of what he called sacred boundaries, the distinctions between self and other, inner and outer, conscious and unconscious. Mass amnesia dissolves these boundaries, creating what Jung warned would be a psychic inflation that leaves individuals vulnerable to possession by unconscious forces. The philosophical principle at work here is what Jung called participation mystique, the primitive psychological state in which individuals cannot distinguish between their own thoughts and feelings and those of others. Digital platforms have recreated this primitive state by creating environments where the boundaries between self and other are deliberately blurred. The story of Pandora's box illustrates this principle perfectly. Pandora was not punished for opening the box. She was punished for her inability to maintain the boundary between curiosity and wisdom. The box contained not evils, but unconscious contents that required careful integration. When these contents were released without proper preparation, they became destructive forces. Today, this dissolution manifests as the inability to distinguish between your own thoughts and the thoughts suggested by algorithms, the experience of feeling responsible for global events beyond your control, or the tendency to form intense emotional attachments to public figures you have never met. The restoration of sacred boundaries requires what Jung called circumambulation, the practice of walking around a problem rather than trying to solve it directly. This allows you to maintain proper distance while still engaging with the issue. Begin by noticing when you feel emotionally overwhelmed by external events and practice the simple statement, "This is not mine to carry. Not everything is yours to carry." Sign 7. The abandonment of creative solitude. Jung's final warning concerned the loss of what he called creative solitude, the capacity to be alone with one's own thoughts without external stimulation. He understood that creativity emerges from the tension between conscious intention and unconscious spontaneity, a tension that can only be maintained in states of quiet reflection. The psychological mechanism at work here is what Jung called the transcendent function, the capacity to hold conscious and unconscious contents in creative tension until something genuinely new emerges. Mass amnesia destroys this function by ensuring that individuals are never truly alone with their own minds. The ancient tradition of the hermit, found in every major religious tradition, recognizes that certain insights can only emerge in solitude. The hermit's withdrawal is not an escape from the world, but a preparation for deeper engagement with it. The hermit returns from solitude with gifts that can only be discovered in the absence of external influence. In our current environment, this manifests as the inability to sit in silence without reaching for digital stimulation, the experience of boredom as a threat rather than an opportunity, or the tendency to fill every moment with content consumption rather than content creation. The restoration of creative solitude requires what Jung called active imagination, the deliberate cultivation of inner dialogue without external input. Begin by setting aside 15 minutes each day for what Jung called the confrontation with the unconscious, sitting quietly and allowing whatever thoughts or images arise to be present without judgment or immediate analysis. Creation requires solitude. We have traced the 7 signs that Jung identified as harbingers of mass amnesia: the fog of perpetual distraction, the erosion of authentic emotion, the collapse of personal narrative, the replacement of wisdom with information, the inversion of the hero's journey, the dissolution of sacred boundaries, and the abandonment of creative solitude. Together, these signs reveal not merely a personal crisis, but a systematic assault on the foundations of human consciousness. Jung's profound insight was that these symptoms are not accidental byproducts of technological progress, but predictable consequences of what he called the inflation of the ego, the belief that consciousness can be improved through external manipulation rather than internal development. The digital age has weaponized this inflation, creating systems that promise to enhance human experience while actually diminishing human capacity. But Jung's warnings came with a promise that consciousness, once awakened to its own processes, possesses an inherent capacity for self-correction. The very recognition of these patterns is the beginning of their dissolution. Memory is not lost all at once. It is chipped away through small compromises, but it can also be restored through small acts of attention. The path forward requires what Jung called the ethical obligation to consciousness. The recognition that awareness is not merely a personal luxury, but a collective necessity. In an age of mass amnesia, every individual who maintains their capacity for authentic experience becomes a beacon for others lost in the fog. Use this knowledge not as a weapon against others, but as a tool for your own liberation. The goal is not to become immune to influence, but to become conscious of the influences to which you are subject, not to escape the collective, but to contribute to it from a place of authentic individuality. Think about this. Which of these 7 signs resonates most strongly with your own experience? What aspect of your authentic self have you allowed to fade in the fog of digital distraction? Let me know what you think in the comments. I read every single one. And of course, subscribe for more high-value content. Remember, beyond the fog, you are still there. Not lost, not broken, not in need of external salvation. You need only to remember. Memory is your map, attention is your weapon, and your sense of self is something that cannot be edited by anyone other than you. The ancient Greeks had a word, anamnesis, the recovery of lost knowledge through recollection. What you seek is not new information, but the recovery of what you have always known. Onward thinkers,